Estamos aqui no 7º CEBUC recebendo o professor James Barborak, da Universidade do Colorado, e ele fez uma palestra muito interessante sobre pontos importantes para que uma área protegida tenha sucesso, que ela prospere. Ele vai nos contar aqui um pouco da palestra que ele fez hoje no 7º CEBUC. James, your lecture was about key points to make protected areas successful. Can you tell us what are the main features, or what would you like to stand out?
I'd be happy to. Thank you for the invitation to talk. Among them, I think that one of the key things is to create more public support and decision-maker support for conservation. And one of the things that I mentioned and that others have mentioned here is that currently most Brazilians do not visit protected areas. It's a foreign concept for them. And so if the country is going to save its natural patrimony and biodiversity, it's going to be extremely important to have greater public and political support for conservation. And that can best be achieved by making many of the more urban protected areas more user-friendly and developing not large infrastructure like necessarily big visitor centers and things like that, but at least having more basic facilities so that people can visit protected areas, particularly those close to major cities, and get to know nature better and get to love it, particularly at an early age through environmental education programs with schools. If you're able to take young children out to areas while they're still young, it's much more likely that they're going to be lifelong supporters of conservation, not only in their backyard, but across all of Brazil.
So visitors are important.
Yes, increasing visitation, and as part of that, increasing public environmental education and support for natural areas conservation. Yes.
Does that help to fund the parks too?
It can, but it's important to not have false expectations. Even in the United States, the concession system and fees only cover a small part of the total budget of conservation. We can't lose sight that protected areas have many other functions besides just promoting tourism and recreation, including the provision of a whole series of environmental services important to society even when people don't realize it. The production of potable water through catchment basin conservation, in extractive reserves, serving as a form of life for many millions of Brazilians who still depend off natural products extracted from these areas, timber and non-timber forest products. They are very important for preventing major floods and droughts and things like this, and serve as important places as nursery grounds for fishery stocks. So there are a whole series of economic benefits that society derives from protected areas besides just tourism. So we shouldn't expect tourism to pay all the bills, and it's extremely important for the government itself to take the responsibility of seeing conservation as an essential public service, just like health or education or public safety.
Okay, and you did tell us that you lived for 20 years in Costa Rica and you studied Latin America. What are the role models that you can appoint?
Well, I think there are a number of role models for different aspects. I think that Brazil is doing a number of things that are in which it is very obviously a leader in all of Latin America and among the developing countries. I think, for example, the system of environmental compensation that companies give to compensate their environmental damages, that's generating a very important flow of resources for conservation. I think many of the larger Brazilian corporations, such as Grupo Boticário, Natura, Vale, and others, are demonstrating their commitment to conservation through their presence here and their support for conservation efforts. I think that Brazil produces many more PhDs in conservation biology than all of Latin America put together probably. So in the area of scientific research and the support of the government for research institutions and your wonderful network of public universities, Brazil is a leader. I would say probably the Argentinians are the people that love their parks most. They have a long tradition of going out to nature. You go to most of their parks and most of the visitors are Argentine. They have a long tradition. The Argentinians also have the best developed ranger or guarda parque force. professionals, not just individuals without a formal preparation. These are people who have a technical degree and who are the formal ranger corps within the protected areas, which is something that Brazil does not have. I believe that Costa Rica is a good model both for its protected area system, for the support of society all the way up to presidents of all major political parties for many decades, and that it also is a country that's had the greatest success in reversing deforestation and going from being one of the world's worst deforesters a generation ago to having reforested basically half of the country in just a generation because of the promotion of ecotourism and through a series of national environmental service payment systems where private landowners and indigenous tribes are compensated for either saving existing forest or restoring forest on degraded lands.
What about Chile?
Chile is a country that has they're a model right now in trail development. Chile has an ambitious proposal to create the Sendero de Chile, 8,000 kilometers long from Atacama Desert in the north all the way to Patagonia in the south. Another thing in which Chile is a leader, and Brazil is too, but in Chile they're very big, is in creation of private reserves.
We only have problems with the Argentinians.
But in the case of Chile, there has been a huge expansion in the number of private reserves. And many of these are located in buffers right next to public parks. And so they actually help to double or triple the total area conserved. So in Chile, there are a lot of very well-managed private reserves, particularly in the southern part of the country, that are examples, I would say, for Latin America as well.
And where do you think Brazil is lagging, scrolling? Where are the areas that we could most improve from a perspective that you have, like you have the advantage of looking from the outside?
Right. I think several talks today about the area of sustainable management of forest on public lands is still in diapers here. Efforts to create not tourism concessions, but rather forest concessions are still struggling, both for industrial forestry and also, more importantly, probably in the long run, for small-scale forest producers. So that would be one area. I know that there are major debates in Brazil right now over the expansion of hydroelectric dams, expansion of road networks, and over offshore oil drilling. Most countries in Latin America are going through similar debates, and I think it will be very important to see how Brazil resolves these debates in a way that both promotes greater economic equity and development of the country, but without destroying the natural heritage in the process. So I think there's a lot of eyes on Brazil to see what decisions are made by the government regarding these major issues, because Brazil is a bellwether because of its economic importance and size for the entire region.
Are you especially thinking about the hydropower in the Amazon?
Right, and you ask about Chile. They are going through exactly the same debate right now, with Supreme Court decisions, with major public protests, and trying to decide, do they create vast hydroelectric reserves in remote areas that require very long high power lines to take this energy to where the people live, which is far north of there, or do they begin to diversify, perhaps doing both things, toward more reliance on solar and wind and geothermal and other sources in which Chile abounds as well. So I think that Brazil is not alone in facing major issues on development of hydropower, mineral resources, road networks, offshore and onshore oil and gas resources as well. Some countries have taken relatively dramatic stands. Costa Rica has banned open pit mining as national policy, and they've banned oil exploration. So that is one extreme. Most countries are not going to be willing to sacrifice the potential royalties and to create energy independence by developing either hydropower or oil and gas resources. So the question then becomes, how do you do it? Where do you do it? What are the environmental compensation mechanisms so that at least you are compensating for some of the environmental damage caused by these major public works?
Okay, James, thank you very much.
Thank you.